Hello, it's Dr. Casey, and welcome to Tea Time with me. I'm joined today by Dr. Matthew Castanho. We went to med school together, and he's a wonderful naturopathic physician. And Dr. Castanho practices in East Hartford, and he has a focus on the treatment of chronic disease, and he does a lot of other stuff. And then I didn't know this about you, Dr. Castanho. You are also an adjunct professor teaching integrative nutrition, which is awesome at Bay Path.
Yep.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So today we are going to talk about tea. I'm going to talk about licorice tea, and Dr. Castanho is also going to talk about a special tea, and then we'll talk about adrenal support. So let's get started talking about tea. All right, so licorice tea. Licorice is this wonderful plant that we use medicinally. We probably all know licorice from Twizzlers and licorice candies, but licorice actually has a lot of wonderful medicinal properties, and we use the root mostly in medicine. It has some really great antiviral and immune supportive properties. It also has a nice affinity for some of the mucous membranes in your body, including in the GI tract. It can be soothing. It can act as a demulcent, kind of calming down irritation. It's also a nice anti-inflammatory. One thing to be aware of with licorice, and this is true for licorice in different medicinal forms, it contains something called glycyrrhizin. And glycyrrhizin, when you have the glycyrrhizin regularly, it can affect your blood pressure, and it can actually increase your blood pressure. So if blood pressure is a concern for you, you may want to be cautious with using licorice or licorice supplements, even licorice tea. Potentially the tea is gentler, but be cautious if you're using them regularly, and just talk with your doctor about that if that's the case. But licorice tea is a gentler way to use licorice. Again, it's got some really nice properties, and it also can be supportive for adrenal health. We often will use it as part of a larger blend of medicinal herbs, because it provides some benefit that way without being necessarily too overwhelming with the glycyrrhizin. And then I'll just mention, you can also get deglycerized licorice. Sometimes you'll see it called DGL. And that's often used to relax one of the flap that covers your stomach to keep stomach acid in, essentially. So DGL is a more common supplement that you might see for that. And that actually has that glycyrrhizin removed, so it's not going to affect your blood pressure. But again, licorice is a wonderful, wonderful plant. Dr. Castanho, is there anything you'd like to add about licorice?
No, you did a pretty good job. I think you summed up most of the main points of it.
Awesome. Cheers. And
cheers.
And I know you wanted to share a little bit about Guayusa. So I would love to hear some more from you about that.
So this is my teacup prop here. I can't have any Guayusa now because it's almost 5:30 and I'd be up all night. So Guayusa is an Amazonian herb. It's been used for millennia with the tribesmen. They drink it before going out on the hunt because it improves their focus and their sense of concentration. Similar to coffee and green tea, it has a decent amount of caffeine in it. But the interesting thing is that it doesn't cause the same caffeine jitters that coffee typically does. So that's why it's typically used prior to war, for a hunt. It was discovered a long time ago by more Western researchers. They took it back and started doing some research with weight loss, and they found that individuals who consumed this Guayusa regularly actually had easier time losing weight. It helps stabilize blood sugars, so people who are at risk of type 2 diabetes or blood sugar dysregulation can drink the Guayusa and have a notable decrease in their blood sugar levels thereafter. And what's cool too, it also has this thing called theobromine, which is an antioxidant that's found in chocolate. So you can get pretty much the caffeine, the theobromine, the lack of tannins as well. So a lot of times people who drink green tea sometimes notice that bitter taste associated with it. While Guayusa has some tannins, it's not nearly as much in concentration as typically green teas or even the acidity of coffee. So there's a company called Runa that makes loose leaf Guayusa, and also I think ones that you can steep in bags. Pick it up, it's on Amazon, and They have a bunch of organic options as well that aren't sprayed with pesticides or anything like that. But certainly as a healthy alternative to drinking coffee every morning, given a couple doses of Guayusa should set you on your way.
And what does it taste like?
Good question. It kind of has, it's a good question. A little bit of like a more grassy flavor, I would say. There's really not, there's not the same tannins or that mouth puckering effect like you typically get with like a green tea. I usually put a couple drops of stevia in, to be honest, so it has a little bit more of a sweet taste to it, but that's mostly lent because of the stevia. Tough to describe. I would say it's a little bit more of a grassy, earthy flavor.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I will have to check it out more too. And I should have mentioned with the licorice is actually a sweeter flavored tea. It's naturally sweet, so you actually don't really need to add much sweetener to it, even if you're used to having sweetener. It's naturally sweet. Yeah. So
Cool.
Thank you for sharing about the Guayusa. Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about adrenal support, adrenal fatigue, if we use that term, because I know it's something that you see with people, wanting to support their adrenal health. That's very important for your whole body health. So how would you maybe explain what the adrenals are and why they're so important?
Yeah, certainly. So we have two little glands. They're really like about the size of walnuts that sit on top of our kidneys on both kidneys in our back. And they're super important for a number of different functions. They help us secrete a hormone called cortisol. They secrete a hormone called aldosterone that helps us control our blood pressure. They secrete sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. They do a whole bunch of these different functions, and it's largely called upon by the brain. So when we experience different types of stressors in our environment, mental, emotional stress, fighting an infection, exercise, lack of sleep, a signal is sent from the brain down to the adrenal glands in our back, and it tells it to stimulate the production predominantly of a hormone called cortisol. A lot of us have heard of cortisol, and it gets a bad reputation because it's associated with stress, but it's actually incredibly important. It helps us increase our blood sugar during periods of time when we haven't eaten for a while, like overnight. It helps decrease inflammation throughout our system. That's why a lot of us will get cortisone injections in our joints. It helps provide focus. It does a whole bunch of these kind of non-specific things throughout the system to help us be able to adapt to whatever type of stressor we're dealing with in our life. The problem is that evolutionarily, before we used to have very acute stressors. We'd be chased by a lion, we escape, and then we're back at peace. Now we've got bills to pay, kids to take care of, just general, things of modern life that are chronically stressing us out. And then on top of that, we don't get enough sleep, we're overworked, and then we typically have to take care of kids and so forth. So the stress really never leaves. And unfortunately, physiologically, our bodies don't know the difference. They don't know the difference between us running from a lion that eventually goes away versus us, dealing with chronic sleep deprivation and going to work. So that signal that gets sent from the brain to the adrenal gland eventually no longer causes the same cortisol response. And it's known as HPA axis dysfunction. Basically, our adrenals say, F you, we're not listening anymore, and don't produce the same amount of cortisol that it may have previously. The other problem is that with the cortisol that is chronically being produced, the cells that this cortisol attaches to also say, F you, we're not listening anymore. So we have this desensitization effect that we can begin to cope and get back into normalcy with a couple of different strategies. One of the things is that you can take a class of herbs called adaptogens. Those adaptogens help with your capacity to respond to that stress and take a little bit of the burden off of the production and necessity of cortisol. You can take things like licorice tea. That has the benefit actually of extending the half-life of cortisol. So instead of needing twice as much cortisol, you need half, because that cortisol doesn't break down as easily in the bloodstream. But nothing's really going to circumvent the need for getting adequate sleep, which I typically recommend is somewhere in the vicinity of 7 to 9 hours. Getting a healthy dose of exercise, which is enough to stimulate weight loss or good healthy body composition, but not too much where you're overdoing it. Making sure that you're maintaining a healthy immune system so you're not fighting any chronic infections or viruses. And then also just putting into practice daily helpful techniques to manage stress, like meditation, getting a massage every once in a while, and then spending some time really, doing something beneficial for yourself. If you enjoy art, spending some time painting. If you like being outdoors, spend some time hiking. We live in a society, I think, that really doesn't place enough emphasis on, the appropriate leisure activities, not video gaming, but, getting out and not working so hard, really. So managing a lot of those stress techniques will help get this HPA axis back online. But also speaking with a professional healthcare practitioner like a naturopathic physician who can actually run the blood work and then also listen to your symptoms to identify the possibility of actually having adrenal fatigue, which is the colloquial term. HPA axis dysfunction is very important.
Yeah. And just to, I think that's so great. And you shared so many nuggets of wisdom there. The HPA axis, that stands for the hypothalamic pituitary axis. And like you mentioned, the brain is telling your adrenals what to do. The H and the P in there in the HPA, those are in the brain, the hypothalamus and pituitary. And I love what were you going to say something?
No, you're doing great.
I love the way you described the adrenals and the function. And I think just kind of underscoring the importance of noticing our stress patterns and how it's kind of like a daily way of life for people now to just have that chronic stress response. It's like baseline, we're not here anymore, we're like up here kind of. And that's when it's that day-to-day stress, that's what's regulating your body's stress response. So it's not something where you can just take a quick pill and fix it. It's something where we really have to bring attention to the lifestyle factors that are involved, in addition to, nutrition and, the things that you mentioned.
That's a very good point, actually, is you mentioned the take a quick pill. Well, what are these symptoms that you'd be looking for? That most people really end up going to their doctor and being prescribed a quick pill rather than having this true HPA axis being addressed. Burnout, that sensation of just feeling fatigued and lethargic all the time, that's a huge symptom associated with HPA axis dysfunction and adrenal issues. Insomnia, especially not being able to fall asleep or waking, especially at 2 to 3 a.m., having an afternoon crash around 2 to 3 a.m., through 2 to 3 p.m. When you stand up quickly, if you ever get lightheaded or dizzy and kind of see some of those stars in your eyes, that's associated many times with this HPA axis dysfunction. Inability to lose weight despite following a diet or exercise. This is actually quite important too. A lot of women transitioning through menopause will notice that they put on some weight and it becomes very difficult for them to lose weight. And a lot of times the problem is actually the fact that pre-menopause, their main source of estrogen production was the ovaries. As they transition through and the ovaries no longer produce estrogen, the backup mechanism that you can actually produce those sex hormones in the adrenal glands. If that adrenal gland is burned out or you have this HPA axis dysfunction where it's no longer responding accordingly, the backup mechanism to that for estrogen production are the fat cells. So they become, metabolically active to produce this hormone. And so if women find that they're putting on weight a lot easier and having more difficulty having, the weight come off, it's not necessarily an issue with their thyroid or their diet. They should look at their adrenals and make sure that those are functioning appropriately, because once that's online, in my practice, I've seen women post-menopausally begin to lose weight just like they had pre-menopausally.
Excellent. Yeah. What are a couple of your, like, if you have any like favorite herbs or nutrients, micronutrients that you might use? And of course, it always depends on the individual, but if there's anything that comes to mind as a favorite.
Sure. So, well, most people in New England, I find deficiencies in 3 main supplements: magnesium, omega-3s, and vitamin D. Those are the 3 big ones that really across the board I find consistently deficient in most people. But the adrenal glands need a number of different vitamins and minerals in order to produce that cortisol and the other hormones. It needs vitamin A, it needs magnesium, it needs a host of B vitamins, B6, vitamin B12. Iron is a big one too. There's a number of different factors that go into actually giving the adrenal gland the building blocks it needs to create these hormones in the first place. So I'm a big fan of running blood work and identifying any underlying nutrient deficiencies that may exist. Because, when you go to see a doctor and you say, I have anxiety, or I'm not sleeping well, or I've got high blood pressure, it's not because you have a deficiency in Ambien or a deficiency in Lexapro or any of these types of pharmaceuticals. It's typically stemming from a deficiency in the nutrients that your body needs to produce the hormones that it's intended to. So that's true root cause medicine. And that's why I got into this field. I didn't want to just mask symptoms with pharmaceuticals. I want to get to the root of what causes these issues to manifest in the first place.
Definitely. And as you're talking, I think it's kind of clear that there are so many connections between everything in the body and, the adrenals and what you're talking about with testing and, the nutrients that you mentioned there. They support so many other systems in the body, and we're looking at everything in conjunction really to see where can we support someone, because if someone's like blood sugar is off, if it's dysregulated, then that's certainly going to impact your adrenal health, just for example. But everything in the body is so amazing, and just everything works together beautifully. So really understanding that, and again, that's a benefit of seeing someone like a naturopathic doctor who really, that's the philosophy we have.
Sure. Yeah.
The whole. Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been so wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share about adrenals or Guayusa?
We could probably do multiple podcasts on the adrenals alone.
This was the nutshell version.
Yeah, this was a good precursor. And if people enjoy listening to this and they want to learn more, please write in something in the comments, and we'll certainly do this again and expand upon it.
Yeah, and I'm going to post your website below. So if anyone wants to check you out in the East Hartford area, they can.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Yeah. Cheers to you.
Cheers.